Most gardeners are obsessed with feeding plants. They pour on compost, drench with fish emulsion, mix expensive bottled nutrients, and still wonder why their soil collapses after a few seasons. The mistake is simple. They focus on nutrients, not structure. And without structure, nutrients wash away, microbes starve, and roots struggle. I've seen raised beds turn back into lifeless dirt in 3 years because nothing stable was ever built into them. There's an ancient material people used to throw away that fixes that problem for centuries, not seasons. It isn't compost, it isn't manure, it isn't some modern microbial inoculant in a shiny bottle. Most gardeners are building soil that disappears every winter. Compost is fantastic, but compost is food. It decomposes, it shrinks. In a hot, wet climate, it can break down shockingly fast. Even in milder regions, you'll lose a significant portion of organic matter every year to microbial respiration. That's not a flaw, that's biology. The problem is when compost is the only structural backbone in your soil. I've tested beds side by side, one built with straight compost and native soil, the other amended with 10 to 15% biochar by volume. After 3 years of identical cropping, tomatoes, brassicas, heavy feeders, the compost-only bed had compacted noticeably. The biochar bed still had crumb structure. Water infiltration was better, root mass was thicker and more fibrous. Charcoal doesn't decompose like compost. It doesn't rot away in a few seasons, it persists. That's the difference between feeding soil and engineering soil. The reason this trash works has nothing to do with nutrients at first. Fresh biochar is not fertilizer. If you spread raw charcoal into your bed and expect miracles, you'll be disappointed. In fact, you can create nitrogen lockup in the short term if you're careless. The magic is in its structure. High-quality biochar is extremely porous. Under a microscope, it looks like a sponge made of carbon. Those pores become housing for microbes. They hold water, they hold cations like calcium, magnesium, potassium, and ammonium. Instead of nutrients leaching down through the profile, they're adsorbed onto the char surfaces and slowly released. In my sandy test plot, untreated soil would dry out in 2 days under summer sun. After incorporating roughly 1 cubic foot of charged biochar per 10 square feet, mixed into the top 8 inches, I extended moisture retention by nearly a full day between irrigations. That doesn't sound dramatic until you scale it across a season. You have to charge it properly or you're wasting your time. This is where most gardeners get it wrong. They dump raw charcoal into soil. Don't. Biochar must be inoculated before application. I soak mine in a mixture of compost tea and diluted urine at about a 1:10 ratio with water for at least 7 to 10 days. You can also mix it directly into finished compost and let it sit for a month. The goal is saturation. Every pore filled with biology and nutrients before it ever touches your bed. In a backyard setting, a simple approach works well. Take 5 gallons of crushed biochar, crushed to pieces smaller than ½ an inch, and mix it into a wheelbarrow with finished compost at roughly 1 part char to 2 parts compost by volume. Keep it moist and covered for 2 to 4 weeks. Then apply that blend at about 1 to 2 inches across the bed surface and work it into the top 6 to 8 inches of soil. In raised beds that are already planted, you can top dress with the char compost mix at about ½ an inch and let worms incorporate it over time. It's slower, but it works. In raised beds, this is where biochar outperforms every other amendment. Raised beds are notorious for nutrient leaching. They drain faster than in-ground soil. That's good for root health, but bad for nutrient retention. When I rebuilt one of my older cedar beds, I mixed in roughly 15% biochar by volume into the entire soil mass. That came out to about 4 cubic feet of char in a standard 4x8 bed filled 12 inches deep. I charged it first, thoroughly. Over the next 2 seasons, I reduced nitrogen applications by about 20% with no drop in yield. Leaf color stayed deep green. There was less blossom end rot in tomatoes, likely due to more consistent calcium availability. The soil didn't collapse the way pure compost-based mixes tend to. You don't need 30 or 40% biochar. In fact, that's excessive. In most garden soils, 5 to 15% by volume is the sweet spot. Above that, you can create drainage that's too aggressive in already sandy soil. This isn't just for soil growers, it even helps in hydroponic transitions. I've also used biochar in hybrid systems, not pure deep water culture buckets, that's different, but in media-based hydroponics and passive wicking beds, in a cocoa coir and perlite blend. Adding 10% fine biochar increased buffering capacity noticeably. EC swings were less dramatic between feedings. Roots colonized the char pieces quickly. Because biochar has high surface area and cation exchange capacity, it acts almost like a biological capacitor. In wicking beds, adding a layer of charged biochar between the water reservoir and the soil column improved nutrient distribution upward. It reduced that common problem of upper layer dryness while the bottom stays saturated. This is not magic, it's physics and chemistry. The ancient farmers understood permanence better than we do. The soils of Amazon rainforest are notoriously poor in natural fertility, yet certain patches remained dark, rich, and productive for centuries. That stability didn't come from compost alone. It came from charred biomass integrated into the soil profile, along with organic waste and ceramics. What they built wasn't just fertile soil, it was resilient soil. Modern gardening advice focuses on seasonal correction. Add this if leaves are yellow, apply this booster during flowering. Ancient systems focused on foundation. If your soil collapses without constant inputs, it's not healthy. It's dependent. There are trade-offs, and you should know them. Biochar is not a quick fix for a dead bed. In the first season, results may be subtle unless you've severely sandy or depleted soil. It shines over time. It also requires effort. Crushing charcoal properly matters. If chunks are too large, surface area drops. If dust is too fine and uncharged, you risk temporary nutrient binding. Source matters too. Do not use charcoal briquettes. Use clean untreated wood char, ideally slow pyrolyzed at moderate temperatures. If you're making it yourself, aim for a clean burn with limited oxygen and quench thoroughly. In heavy clay soils, biochar improves aggregation, but can increase drainage faster than expected. In that case, stay closer to 5 to 8% by volume and monitor moisture carefully. How I apply it in a typical backyard garden. For an in-ground 100 square foot garden bed, I'll use about 10 cubic feet of charged biochar compost blend if I'm targeting a 10% integration in the top 6 inches. That translates to roughly 1 cubic foot per 10 square feet. I spread it evenly, incorporate it with a broad fork and rake, irrigate deeply, and plant immediately. There's no waiting period if it's properly charged. In established perennial beds, asparagus, berries, I trench lightly along drip lines and backfill with char compost mix. Over 2 to 3 seasons, soil texture improves noticeably without disturbing root systems. This is infrastructure building. Think in decades, not months. Modern methods don't compete because they're not designed to last. Synthetic fertilizers can produce impressive short-term growth, so can heavy compost applications, but neither creates stable carbon architecture in soil. Biochar does. Once integrated, it doesn't vanish. It continues hosting microbes year after year. It continues holding nutrients through heavy rains. It reduces leaching into groundwater. It stabilizes pH swings in subtle but meaningful ways. If your goal is to build soil your kids can garden in without starting from scratch, this is the kind of amendment that matters. And no, it won't replace compost. Compost feeds the system. Biochar anchors it. Together, they create a feedback loop that gets stronger with time instead of weaker. The difference shows up in root systems first. The first place I notice improvement is not in top growth, it's below ground. When you pull a plant from char-amended soil, roots are thicker, more branched, and often darker from microbial associations. Mycorrhizal colonization seems more consistent. Drought stress symptoms show up later in the season. You don't get that from quick-release fertilizers alone. Healthy soil isn't about pushing plants. It's about supporting them. This is about building soil that outlives you. Most gardening advice is seasonal. Biochar is generational. You're taking what was once considered waste, burnt plant matter, and turning it into a structural framework that can function for centuries. Not metaphorically, literally. That's why those ancient dark soils still exist. If you're serious about long-term productivity, experiment with 5% in one bed and leave another untouched. Track moisture, track yield, track input costs over 3 seasons. The difference will speak for itself. And if you value practical knowledge that makes your garden stronger every year, instead of resetting it every spring, subscribe to the channel and share this with another serious grower. The more we focus on building soil that lasts, the better our food and our land becomes.